Hi, and welcome to IndieBio's Fundamental Questions of Biotech, where every week we gather for a conversation about some of the biggest questions facing biotechnology. My name is Julie Wolf, and I'd like to welcome you to our little corner of the internet where we host these virtual events, meant to be a relatively casual conversation, particularly for those of you who are at the end of your workday in the Eastern time zone. But we recognize that now we are living in this virtual world, and this allows us to reach those of you who might be at an earlier or later time. And in fact, our panelists are also experiencing a difference in time, as we were just speaking before the cameras turned on. Before I introduce the panelists and our topic for today, I would like to walk those of you who are new to our little event space here through some of the features that will add to your experience today. As you scroll down, please notice that there are the bios of today's panelists, as well as links related to some of the topics that we will be talking about during our conversation. There are also a couple of buttons I'd like to point out. There is one that invites you to sign up for our IndieBio events newsletter. Please sign up if you're interested in coming to more conversations like these. I will just send those opportunities directly into your inbox with that newsletter. There is also a button to apply. So this is specific to those of you who are biotech founders out there who have a startup that you would like to take and become a part of the IndieBio community. So go ahead if you are interested in applying to either IndieBio New York's second class or IndieBio San Francisco's 11th class. You can click that button, see what types of information we're looking for. It's really a pretty low lift. We don't ask you to fill out lots and lots of forms. And we are both recruiting for both of our coastal programs now in New York as well as in San Francisco. And finally, let me say that we have just finished our first program for IndieBio New York. We had our demo day earlier this week, and if you were unable to attend, we would like to invite you to revisit some of the conversations that we had, and I believe that one of my colleagues will be able to put the link for that event, because I forgot to add it to the show notes ahead of time, so that you can go ahead and check that out as well. Now I would like to turn the mic over to welcome our guests to today's panel and highlight some of the ways that public health and biotechnology and high growth companies are all coming together to solve some of the biggest problems facing our planet. With me to my right, although I'm not sure how he is showing up to you, is Terry Huang, the founder of CUNY School of Public Health's Firefly Innovation Accelerator, as well as a wearer of many other hats. Thank you for joining us today, Terry.
Thank you, Julie. It's a pleasure.
And with me to my left, but again, I'm not sure how you guys are saying this, is co-founder and managing director of Q3 Consulting Group, Walid Korenfleh. Hi, Walid. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to join you.
Now, I often like to, before we kick things off, invite our panelists to give a little more detail about their background and the other ways that they've lived in this public health and biotechnology space. And so I think I'll turn first to you, Terry, because I know that just like IndieBio New York, Firefly Innovations opened in 2020. It's certainly a year that highlights the need for public health innovations. And I wonder if you could talk, of course, about your background, but also about the impetus to open this new, School of Public Health-based accelerator.
Sure. Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. So thank you, Julie, and thank you to the team at IndieBio for this invitation. So a little bit about me first. I'm probably one of the few people with a PhD in public health, preventive medicine, and have a business degree at the same time. And for good reason, because, for a long time, as some of you may know, there's sort of this dichotomy, a false dichotomy, I would say, between, those sort of the dominant school in public health, thinking that public health really should just, be the business of the public sector, and that, solutions to public health challenges, really rest with the public sector. Anything that had to do with the private sector was sort of seen as not entirely kosher. And so that really has, I think, defined how public health R&D has traditionally been funded, and relying primarily on government and foundation-based grants and contracts, The problem with that is that one, a lot of what actually gets funded isn't so innovative, because in order to get the funding, you have to already demonstrate very low likelihood to fail. And those of you who work in the startup world know that that's not exactly the path to innovation. The second problem is that most R&D basically ends when a grant or contract ends. And any type of dissemination, diffusion, or scale up of R&D products and programs and services really is an afterthought, if there's a thought about that at all. So what happens, in public health over the years is that very little of what gets produced is scaled up. And so I think those two fundamental problems have hampered public health's ability to really get under the skin of some of the major challenges we face today. I've spent a good chunk of my career, the last 20 years, working in the area of obesity and related chronic disease. And despite all the efforts that we put into this topic, we haven't really exactly made a dent. And I was just so heartbroken when the latest national data came out from NHANES, the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey data, which is the gold standard data that we have in the United States to track disease surveillance, including obesity. The latest data showed that actually, the rates continue to go up. And now we're talking about over 40% of American adults, being obese. And so it just, I think, speaks volumes, about the fact that we need different solutions and different approaches. And so the impetus behind the founding of Firefly Innovations are, really threefold. One is, as I mentioned, public health needs innovation, and it needs really, serious rethink about a scale-up innovation. And then secondly, what I've also observed in the social impact world is that, communities that really need and can benefit from social innovation are really disconnected from the ecosystem out there. And there are some fundamental structural issues in the social impact space. One is most of the people who are doing social impact actually don't have any lived experiences of the problems that they're trying to solve. Most of them are not public health people. They're not people from the community. And so there's a certain degree of naivete, if I may use that word, among many social entrepreneurs that, oh, well, if we just come up with a better technology, then the problem will be solved. Well, guess what? It's not so easy. And I think we've had a lot of failed examples from recent years that we can learn from. The third impetus, I would say, is that public health can bring tremendous expertise to the startup venture world. For one, we are experts when it comes to monitoring and evaluation. So to the extent that you truly believe in social impact, you would like to know, ideally, what kind of impact you're actually having. Well, to do that, you need people with the appropriate evaluation expertise and who understand the complexity of the social system and the public population health system, and to be able to really identify and collect the appropriate metrics. The other part that I think is so critical is that public health brings a very unique social determinants and equity lens to the table, right? So connected to kind of the second point that I made, that a fundamental part of social impact is that we're improving the lives of everybody, not only people who can afford to have better lives, but everybody. And that equity lens, I think, is so critical. And I think, and because that is core to public health training, I think, bringing public health folks to the table in the startup venture space will add tremendous value and will help all of us collectively move towards a more sustainable future, but sustainable not only in terms of economics or environmental measures, but also in terms of social measures. And so I'll just leave it there for now, and then we can circle back and talk a little bit more about Firefly innovations.
Yeah, absolutely. So many interesting points to follow up on. But before we follow up on that thread, I would like to have Walid maybe talk a little bit about your experience. Of course, you have a lot of experience working in biotech for many years, and now working as a consultant, helping to, I would say, work within communities, kind of as Terry was just talking about, to make sure that some of these measures are implemented in ways that actually have an effect. So can you talk a little bit about your experience, Walid?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I want to thank you and thank IndieBio for their invitation. It's exciting to see this progress in terms of entrepreneurship and innovation that's taking place in the past decade or so. Things have changed compared to the 80s and 90s. I will echo some of the points that Terry has made, but also I will add to it and provide a bit of a perspective considering some of the work that I've done, not only in North America, but in Europe and the Middle East. As you said, I graduated from medical school, so it's always from University of Louisville School of Medicine. And it seemed like even when I was in medical school, public health seemed on the fringe. It didn't seem like a sort of real science, unfortunately. That's a perception that was dominant perhaps in the 70s and the 80s. And then I got my MBA again from Penn State University. So because of sort of my interest on the business side of science, I've worked what today is known as GlaxoSmithKline. I was part of SmithKline Beecham or SmithKline French. And then I worked for Sterling Winthrop in New York and Kodak, which later became part of Sanofi. And we led teams that led in the area of drug discovery and drug development. And that experience sort of got encapsulated. I founded 6 biotech companies, 3 that have successful exits in the US. And eventually I ended up on the, in 2004, founding my consulting firm that focuses on R&D, but that work itself took me on the management side of R&D, which later took me on the policy side of R&D, and opened a sort of a new door in terms of looking at public health and policies and how policies impact public health in terms of innovation, in terms of being inventive, in terms of entrepreneurship. And I have to say, I can actually provide some concrete examples during our conversation and some of the things that one can point out. And just to kind of kick off the conversation, if one focuses on public health threats like what COVID has done, just from my personal network, my colleagues who are physicians or who work in hospitals or in an R&D environment, as they say, necessity is the mother of invention. And you can see a variety of ways that people have been inventive in order to enable them to do the job. And there's recently a very nice paper that came out of Imperial in Nature Medicine, I believe, that talks about frugal invention, right? I mean, because sometimes you don't have enough resources. And that paper nicely lists examples throughout Europe of how scientists, researchers, physicians, public health officials have sort of made inroad in terms of inventing certain things that they needed for work or for a job. From the policy side, I can give you a perspective of how culture impact policy and how the policies are impacting the sort of rules and regulations in terms of public health. The culture in Middle East is not what's in the UK or Germany or North America. You know, while we in North America value our freedoms and individual space, in certain parts of the Middle East, that's not the case. I mean, they look at the government as the driver, and then we can give quite few examples in terms of AI, big data, certain apps that has been put out for contact tracing and management. Actually, I'm a living one example of that, you know, that I can share with you and the audience. So, so that's briefly just to kick off the conversation. I think it's important to know where one was so that you know where you are headed. But definitely, in a public health crisis like a pandemic like COVID that has transcended lots of things within a society, as Terry has been mentioning, and I'm talking about social innovation. You are seeing the importance of really a network and a cohesiveness among the different countries. I mean, what Germany does might impact Spain, France, and UK, and so forth. And I'll stop here so that I can sort of have the opportunity for you to kind of lead on a different direction.
Thank you, Waleed. That's very interesting. And both Terry and Waleed, you guys have said so many things that I want to follow up with right away. But I do like to sit back and let you give your introduction.
Sure.
And so I want to say a little bit about where I was thinking when I posed this question: is public health an investable thesis? And this actually did come from COVID-19 and sitting in. I was hosting another panel with VCs. And June Axup, who's the CSO over in our San Francisco office, was showing a timeline just of infectious disease outbreaks within the last 50 years. And you could see that the tick marks were coming more and more frequently due to various spillover events. And just talking about perhaps the need for the kinds of technologies that would be on the preventative side and how these would come into play more frequently, be able to adapt to new vaccine measures or treatment modalities or things along those lines. And I started to kind of percolate on that for a little while, thinking about how, of course, IndieBio has always invested in the companies that are solving big problems of human and planetary health. And we think of this kind of, as Terry was saying, just kind of distinct from public health in and of itself, but really there's a place where these innovations can be married with the commercialization and the access. And Terry, you brought up a really great point with the ending of grants. Like, that is something I haven't thought about before, but how innovation is often funded up to a certain amount of time. And then because perhaps the grant isn't renewed or the student moves on, perhaps it isn't implemented in the same sense, right? So maybe we could talk a little bit just about how we need some commercialization to occur in order to implement some of these things for longer term health benefits.
Yeah. So I think, in many ways, maybe NSF, National Science Foundation, has been a little bit more successful because, that's kind of a major source of funding for, engineers and others in the STEM fields, for example. And so there's, I think a more, historically, there's been more thought, put into the processes and resources needed, for commercializing products that come out of NSF funding. But this is a lot less so, I would say, in public health. We do have like small business innovation grants in the public health sector, but they're not, I would say they're not as prevalent as, one might hope. And not very much goes towards the kind of, preventive services and products that you were talking about, or and I think there's also a bit of a divide, so these small business innovation grants, you always have to have a small business partner in order to really, be eligible for these mechanisms. So your average researcher, academic researcher working in a research institution and a university, they don't really go after, they themselves, on their own would not be eligible for these small business innovation grants. And I can tell you that there's zero training about business in public health schools. And so, most people in public health just don't have this expertise. And you have this, prevailing, attitude, prevailing culture in the field of public health, that's been around for decades, if not centuries, that, again, public health, rests squarely in the public sector, in that anything that the private sector does is really bad, it's evil. And I have a very different perspective, of course, because I not only have worked for many years in academia, but I've also worked in the federal government for many years, many moons ago. And in both arenas, I've been in positions where I had to interface with across sectors, stakeholders across sectors. And so, the much of my sort of academic philosophy and epistemology, really aligns with a field that's called system science, and this is a science that a set of a philosophy and a set of approaches, that have been applied in many arenas. Public health is a relatively new arena for system science methods to be applied. But if you really are a systems thinker and you believe that the problems that we face today, whether it's COVID, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, what have you, that these are complex problems, then the solutions cannot be simplistic, right? Solutions will need to be multi-layered and will need to be a package of strategies that are interconnected, that strategies that reinforce each other, and that strategies that have to adapt. Now, these are concepts that are really quite radical in public health, because public health is traditionally a very linear, process, and the gold standard, if you will, is the randomized control trial in medicine and public health. Which is great, in many ways, but it also has a lot of limitations. For one, how do you actually do a randomized control trial with a complex package of solutions? Very difficult, especially at the community or population level. And so given this sort of unique philosophical and epistemological background that I bring to the table, and having worked and witnessed the power of working, of interfacing across sectors, trying to connect the dots, and in believing firmly that solutions to problems like obesity and all of the chronic diseases, infectious diseases that we're challenged with today, really require all actors, all hands on deck. All actors across different sectors, across different settings, have an important role to play. And so the question is, how do we coordinate everything that each is supposed to be doing, right? And so, one big motivation behind the founding of Firefly Innovations is not only to just churn out more ventures, that is one of the goals, but at a deeper level, we're really trying to create a new paradigm in public health and transform the way we approach these complex public health challenges by leveraging this platform, to bring together different stakeholders and see if we can carve out, some truly innovative synergy, that will really kind of take the possibilities of how to deal with these complex, public health challenges, to that next level. Mm-hmm. So it's, I have been a beneficiary of lots of foundation and public funding for my own research. I have a very active research portfolio. I direct two, research funded centers at the CUNY School of Public Health, in addition to running a department and now running Firefly Innovations. But I don't believe in, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but I do believe in adding more tools, more energy, more resources to the toolbox of public health. And I think that the entrepreneurial process, the entire enterprise of venturing is very dynamic, very powerful, and it can work beautifully alongside the more traditional tools we have in public health.
Absolutely. And I'd like to explore this, aligning stakeholders a little bit more. I think aligning public and private and perhaps nonprofit stakeholders all together working to improve, public health is one thing that I'd be curious about some of the strategies, but behind this and your thoughts about the strategies. And I'm thinking about this because on the Firefly Innovations website, I saw the United Nations SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, as one of the things that might be the driving force. And the United Nations is actually now collecting, funds from various countries to help dedicate to some of these measures. And I wonder how you think this or other types of measures might help to promote some of those innovations that you're talking about.
So I'm so glad that you brought that up. So here's the issue with the SDGs and how we have kind of traditionally approached the SDGs. If you really sit at your computer and read all the different SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, it wouldn't take you very long to recognize that all of those goals are actually interconnected, and yet most of our solutions have been crafted to target one SDG at a time. Well, I can tell you that if that's our approach, we're not going to meet even halfway, to the goals by 2030. So increasingly, again, this is the systems view, coming to play. Increasingly, there's recognition, even among those who work at the UN, because I interface also with the folks, for example, at the UN Global Compact, and obviously, people in my business, I'll do a lot of work with the UNICEF, with the WHO, so on and so forth. Increasingly, I think there's recognition that true innovation and true solutions to the world's biggest challenges will have to tackle multiple SDGs simultaneously. So what are the products, services, and programs that can, essentially be that one stone that hits multiple birds at once? And I think that that's the way we need to think. And I actually believe that a lot of the startups, that I've interfaced with, not only within Firefly, but throughout my network, they're doing some really innovative things. But most of them, when I ask them, the founders, that is, so what kind of impact do you think this will have, and how are you going to measure your impact? And if you think about the SDGs, like 1, 2, and 3, can you envision you're having an impact in all 3 buckets? Usually, I just get like a silent face. they're thinking, but they don't quite know how to answer. Exactly. Because again, we're not thinking sufficiently in that, cross-targeting and in truly intersectoral ways. And so that's one of the things that we want to do in Firefly. I know it's a tall order, because people apply to accelerator, to a hackathon, and we're asking them to, look at the SDGs and name at least two that they, that their product or their service, could potentially impact. It's a tall order. I mean, people aren't used to thinking about these questions, but I do think that, this is a really important start of a conversation. And if we collectively, as a community of practitioners can begin to push for that, we will help, the ecosystem grow. Eventually this will become the standard of practice. So anyway, so that's just my little beef with SDGs and how so much more work needs to be done, in this space, but in a different way.
I can see how you would approach these as a systems thinker, and I should have seen that answer coming after you had said that you're a systems thinker. So I would like to remind our audience that we do have a place for you to submit your questions, and we have several that have been submitted already. And I think that, and thank you, Victor, for submitting these. Waleed, I think this one would perhaps be best addressed for you to start, which is, could you give some examples of successful private enterprises that have been well aligned to public health interests? And given your experience with your own startups and working in this space, I wonder if you have some examples related to COVID-19 or other, of things that are, startups that have also been addressing some of the greatest needs of public health.
Yeah, so I can give actually two examples, one that relates to diabetes and one that actually relates to COVID. And both of them actually are apps and sort of AI driven. One is that relates to COVID for contact tracing, is actually a partnership between the government of Qatar here and a private company that developed the app. And the diabetes is about managing diabetes for patients. And there have been several actually crossover in terms of countries of involvement of people in Germany, particularly University of Heidelberg, and some of the collaborators here in the Middle East. But I would like, I don't want to digress, I will answer the question, but I want to sort of make a couple of points based on the previous conversation that I think also people would benefit from, and it adds to what you and Terry specifically has added. And I think multi-sectoral involvement is extremely important, and you see that particularly in terms of the need of research evidence so that policymakers and decision makers are able to make the right decisions and formulate the right policies. And actually, we recently published specifically a paper on that in a journal that talks about life science society and policy. The other thing that Terry mentioned in terms of stakeholders' involvement and innovation, well, you see things from the academia, particularly with the period where technology transfer offices have been established and they drive to sort of push the innovations. Public health is sort of a novel beast for them. They can understand engineering, physics, maybe a bit of life sciences, but not necessarily sort of public health. So there's that one aspect. And then there is the aspect of the need, as you said, of the private-public partnership. So not just the dependence on angel investors or VCs. So now let me go back to my two examples. So one of these, initially the main issues that we faced here from a public health perspective is if you want to open the economy here, because the economy was shut down from March until August, how are you going to open it? and how you're going to do the contact tracing, and how you're going to manage the issue of exposure and hospitalization. So while the financial muscles has come from the government, the partnership with the private sector enabled the government to develop a specific app, and that app is sort of GPS related and depends on the maps, and it's AI driven. And it's simply just like we have social security numbers in the US. Here they have national numbers. So the app is connected to your national number, and it has three sort of traffic light colors, right? Red, that means you are in quarantine and you shouldn't be out. And if you get caught, then there are certain ramifications to that. If you are yellow, you are suspected, and there are a set of rules or regulations to deal with it. If you are green, then you can go out, you can go shopping, you can go to the mall with the right precaution. So I think the driver behind that is actually AI, machine learning, the ability actually to process this big data has been central to managing some public health crisis, which is something that Terry alluded before, that public health in some ways for the longest time was traditionalist. And as a matter of fact, I read an article that there was a company in Canada, I Blue something, I can't remember the name right now. It's from the University of Toronto, that supposedly their AI model has predicted COVID is going to be spread and be a pandemic as early as December. So I think there are this intermarrying of computer science and public health and policies that is happening as we speak, that's going to be a driver. So that's one example in terms of how innovation, how policies, and how partnership between a government and private sector has sort of influenced this example here in Qatar. I can give you also another example in the area of diabetes, just like Terry was saying, that managing diabetes is a package, right? I mean, you cannot just handle one aspect of it. In the Middle East region, I think type 2 diabetes is very prevalent. And 6 of the top 10 countries are actually in the GCC, which is the Gulf Cooperation Council. And that includes Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, and Kuwait. So you have 6 countries where type 2 diabetes is prevalent. Bariatric surgery is also extremely prevalent. So in collaboration with University of Heidelberg, they developed an app that allows the diabetic patients to manage their nutrition, to manage their physical activity, and you see sort of if you connect this to lifestyle, for their lifestyle, as Terry said, it's a package, and you see that behavior change. And you are not just affecting the individual, but you are influencing the society and the surrounding. Because if you are just a one person, it's just like exercising. At some point, you might give up, right? In exercising, you might need a buddy. You might need a sort of to be part of a group if you are a runner, or if you, rather than just relying on yourself. And I think we have seen some measures of success from health promotion and health behavior changes that otherwise you won't be able to see. Now, if you ask me personally, I mean, it's great, this idea of sort of app and this digital health that we are seeing, But I think at the same time, it's not a panacea, and people are taking it to an extreme. So not every thing is going to be amenable to this. And I think if you ask me, if I'm seeing, particularly in North America and at least in the Middle East, I've done a little bit of work in Europe. I think there is an app fatigue. It's not every innovation and every company that's going to come is going to solve something through an app.
Correct.
You know?
Correct.
And I think perhaps maybe Terry can comment on that specifically, because probably he has seen through his innovation lab and his innovation program that some of that. Maybe in public health it's novel, but in other sort of aspects of education or mental health or and so forth, I think we are taking it to a bit to an extreme. That's sort of. I
think
guess I
that
want to open it for discussion as well.
No, I think you're absolutely right on, Walid. I mean, like frankly, the evidence base around the effectiveness of app-based solutions for behavior change is very, very weak, as
Yes.
you know, many of you know. And so, so on the one hand, I think we're only scratching the surface, in terms of digital health products. They're just, for the most part, not that sophisticated yet. On the other hand, just as Wally said, we're not going to crack, the challenge of obesity through a more advanced personal app. That could be a piece of, a solution package.
Exactly.
But that in and of itself is not going to solve the problem. And so I'll tell you, I won't tell you which app that I joined, but I joined a very, a widely advertised app, one of the sort of, best known apps in the US right now. And I stayed on it for maybe, not even 6 months. And I got tired of it. I was like, I just need a break. I just can't anymore. It was helping me in terms of just keeping track, but it wasn't really helping me in terms of losing weight. Now, granted, I'm probably not the best, most compliant patient in that regard. But regardless, I was, wasn't really trying to lose weight. I was mainly interested in seeing like how this app really worked because everybody was talking about it. So, but my conclusion was that okay, there are some redeeming qualities in how this app is being organized and being set up. There's some theoretical components that they've integrated, which is really nice. But overall, the way it works is still quite rudimentary. I mean, even when it comes to like helping people keep a journal of their diet. It's very rudimentary, and most of the mixed dishes that I eat, particularly ethnic cuisine, I would need to break down every component and enter into the app, right? And and of course, when you do that, you're missing out on the sauces and condiments, else, that are also calorie laden. That don't get entered into the app. So at the end of the day, it's just not very sophisticated. So we've been at this for a long time.
That's right.
So
one of the points, Terry, that you and Walid have both made is the importance for measurement of efficacy. And as you just said, there's not a lot of efficacy data. So how do we improve that going forward with some of these measures to make sure that the good parts are included, and maybe we stop with the burdensome parts of like having to break down every vegetable, sauce, oil that's in one's diet.
So there's not a lot of efficacy data, and what efficacy data there are usually based on very small samples or very short-term studies. And if you think efficacy data is bad, there's almost no effectiveness data. Right. And the difference here is that effectiveness is, when you really disseminate the program or product and you, scale it up and you want to know if the findings that you discovered in your efficacy, pilot study, if you will, are actually scalable? Can they be generalized to much larger population, perhaps much more heterogeneous,
Right.
and there's almost no data at that level. And so and the other thing I want to kind of really stress is that again, public health is not just about personal behavior. That's one important component, but we have some fundamental systems problems. I mean, so if you think about it, there's a lot of hoopla around electronic medical records, right? This is kind of the new thing, and every hospital system is trying to, get on with, the latest technology. But Wally can tell you, he's a physician. The electronic medical records that we have, even if they're far better than 10 years ago, they're still very rudimentary. And there's actually very little in terms of other than sort of computerizing things that would normally go into paper charts. There's very little in the electronic medical records that connect to what happens outside the health system. And most of the problems and sources of health problems that people have, particularly around chronic diseases, right, are social and community, and so if you were a physician, your health system, you're trying to help a person, establish a healthier lifestyle, help them manage, their medication, get more compliant, become more compliant, or adherent, with their medications. Maybe they have social service needs, housing problems. These are the root causes of their health condition. There's nothing in the electronic medical record that will help the physician, the nurse, to help you address those issues, or even refer you, to the appropriate resources. And so if you think about this, right, we need a lot more innovation in terms of system solutions, right? Because that's what public health is. And public
Correct.
health is about the system. It's about transportation. It's about urban planning. It's about housing. It's about sanitation. It's about all of these things that determine how we behave, how we eat, how we exercise, how we go to work, how we learn, how we sleep, right? And all of those things then in turn lead to the chronic disease conditions that challenge us today.
Yes, absolutely.
And so at that system level, we just need a lot more innovation. How do we get there? And so the first step is to have a panel like this, to get all of you to start thinking about public health in a different light. You're not going to learn this if you just go stick, with the traditional social impact, world, right? And this is where I think people like Wally, myself, having this public health lens, this framework, bring that to the table, can really enrich, how people actually go about doing social impact. And that is so critical.
Yeah, so one of the things actually we have seen on the ground, particularly in North America, whether it's Canada or US, and then again, you look at sort of a more social healthcare system, perhaps like France and UK, and a more extreme one that's controlled like China. One of the key things, and because Terry talked about system, is the data is siloed and not interconnected. I don't think, my home state is Michigan. I doubt that the public health data in the state of Michigan is connected to its neighbor state of Ohio, for example, or state of Indiana. So, I think while this is a gap, it also presents an opportunity for innovation, right? I mean, that's one aspect of it. The other thing that we have seen on the ground, maybe this is not the case in the US, but in other places, because sometimes when you talk about public health, there is the microcosm and the micro level, and then there is the macro level. So if you talk about the macro level, it's you see competing agendas. You are, especially in terms of sort of perhaps policies, and you rightfully pointed that health and lifestyle is not just about behavior, but you see the mixed messages, you see the competing agendas, you see the people that are protective of their fiefdom and protective of their sort of environment and what they control, the data and so forth. So trying to bring those stakeholders and to try to cut through all this red tape, sometimes it's not easy. It's not easy. It almost and that's something that we point out at some point. Things are not solely driven by science and innovation. And I sort of made this argument or this statement that health is a political choice. So it almost, you need a political will in order to drive certain aspects of public health. And I think perhaps a COVID pandemic has crystallized that in the sense that at a national level or even at an international level, you really need the sort of political will in order to achieve certain milestones. And I think that's a component that perhaps is not as explored, and that's why I like the questions: public health and investable thesis. Of course, it is an investable thesis, but not just purely from a sort of research, scientific, or public health perspective. And I think there needs to be a corollary or a parallel to that, and that is the sort of governance, policies, and political will in order to enable the outcome of this investable thesis. Because there are certain things are just part of the regulation. At the end of the day, FDA regulates, FDA regulates.
Right. Yeah.
And I appreciate that point very much, and that's why at the outset of establishing Firefly Innovations, we were very specific that one of the things that we didn't want to do was to duplicate what others are doing, because we don't want to be competing against other social impact ventures out there, or social impact operators out there. We want to bring people together. Right?
Yes.
There are a lot of players, very smart people out in the field. What I want to do is rally everybody to say, hey, let's pull our resources and talents and energy together to do something about public health. Because I think public health is something we can all believe in. We may not all understand the full complexity of it, but by bringing our diverse perspectives together, we will. Right? And that's how you crack the nut. That's how you build a political will. Right? Because if there are 10 of us saying that this is something that needs to be invested in, we will more likely to get it, from government or from private investors.
Yes.
So that's what we want to do. And that's why I think, again, I appreciate, CUNY School of Public Health, giving me the opportunity to do this. And I think we're in the perfect setting, to launch something like Firefly, because we are a public institution. We have a mission of serving the needy. And naturally, a big piece of our work is to actually identify and cultivate entrepreneurs from underserved communities, entrepreneurs who themselves understand and have the lived experience of the social problems that they're trying to solve, and that fixes one of the structural issues that I talked about earlier at the beginning of the panel, but again, just running, hackathons, accelerators, incubators is not enough. Like, that's only one of 4 pillars for Firefly Innovation. We also recognize the education piece, both educating public health folks to become more entrepreneurial and appreciate what entrepreneurship can bring, as well as, training people outside public health, different disciplines in the private sector, around this public health lens that we've been, talking about tonight. And then the networking and partnership piece, goes straight to that, building that advocacy coalition and building that political power, across all of us, right? So we can actually have a common agenda and seek resources, for the common agenda. And then, eventually, really solidifying our last and fourth pillar, which is strategic science, because I think all of us collectively have an interest in documenting what kind of impact we're having. I mean, if you look at Silicon Valley, I mean, they spend what, like, I don't know, $100 billion a year in investing in ventures, and they don't even care, who or what they're throwing their money at, because out of 100 companies, they just want one that becomes a unicorn. That's crazy. That's essentially legalized gambling, And so I think in the social impact space, we should be better, and we can be better. But we also need to be more agile, because up till now in the social impact space, because of the perception that the risk is higher, only the more mature companies, the more connected founders can have access to capital. That leaves out a whole swath of people, especially those rooted in communities that can really benefit most from innovation, completely disconnected from the ecosystem. So we got to, think of a way to really unearth, these talents. There's so much innovation. While you were talking about, I think it was doctors, that were just inventing things to solve problems they have at work. Well, yes, patients do exactly the same thing. A large percentage of patients and just regular people in communities are constantly inventing and reinventing solutions to solve their own problems, because there are no products or services on the market to meet their needs. And so let's unearth those talents, and figure out a way to make them, scalable and sustainable, right? And we'd be also doing society a great service by just creating more entrepreneurs and creating business opportunities, and allow we don't need any more $1 trillion companies. What we need is a proliferation of sustainable businesses that care about serving their own communities. That's what we should be, endeavoring to doing.
Very well said, Terry.
Terry, this reminds me actually with a paradigm shift that happened in the banking industry, where they have done giving loans, right? I mean, they used to be clients with certain criteria, and then as a sort of an experiment that ended up being sort of then universalized, is giving microloans for people that very small businesses, that a typical bank that wouldn't have done it. And I think maybe even the guy eventually won Nobel Prize for that, for this sort of innovation, because bank perceived them as people that would default. Ended up they are the most likely people not to default, actually.
Right.
So, and I think the same thing in public health and in innovation, especially when you talk about diversity of communities, cultures, and needs. We need that paradigm shift in public health and innovation that sort of address these issues in a way that's a bit different. You don't have to have a unicorn that like Facebook or Microsoft and so forth. You can have a very successful business, and you can do good and have a good social and health outcomes, without being a unicorn. Yeah. So, and I think that's something I think where perhaps IndieBio and other players in the field, they themselves can be the drivers behind those types of innovation, if they don't stick to that sort of one specific model. Like this idea of banking and loaning that sort of a paradigm shift to microloans, and that's the kind of paradigm shift that probably is necessary at this stage. I think perhaps all the components are there.
I agree.
But you need a leader. You need a leader. And you need a leader, and I think maybe IndieBio and
well, we need to work together. That's for sure.
Yes.
After this can't be the end of this conversation.
No.
So we have to. I would love for us to figure out a way to work together and actually make this happen, just as you suggested, Wally. I think it would be fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, this has been actually a super conversation. I've really enjoyed all of the back and forth in this entire discourse, but sadly we're at the top of the hour. So before I say thank you very much to both of you, I would like to give you just a brief opportunity to, I usually ask people is the question, right? Like, so that you can address that in a 30-second to 1 minute answer, like is public health an investable thesis? Now, Waleed, you have actually directly answered this during the conversation, which was great. But I'd like to hear just like some final closing thoughts in terms of public-private sectors working together to benefit all of society. And perhaps you'd like to kick things off, Waleed, and then Terry, you can have the closing thoughts here. How's that sound?
Sounds good. So the answer. I always start, even in my presentations, I start with the conclusion and then I go through the rest of the presentation. But I think the one point that I want to emphasize, and I'm sure, and even Terry made that point, that three things. I mean, it has to be multi-sectoral. It has to be with different kinds of partners, and sometimes atypical type of partners and stakeholders, sometimes that you might think. I always say, if you want to have a proper health policy decision making, you have to marry the Minister of Finance with the Minister of Health, which is the equivalent of the Treasury with the Department of Health in the US. And the third point that I think it's related to innovation, we gloss over innovation sometimes. Even now, innovation has become a bit structured, right? And we have somewhat of a tunnel vision in terms of we look how we look at the technology, or we look at the invention itself, or we look at the investment part. And I think if in order to have that paradigm shift, I think we need to not have preconceived notions on that. So those are the 3 points that I would sort of say, yes, it's an investable thesis. It's important to have
qualified by these things.
No, you have to have these components, and ultimately, on a large scale, especially for a public health, when you talk about a population-based approach, it's a political will and a regulatory issue.
All right, thank you so much, Waleed.
Thank you.
Terry,
I'll be quick. I'll be quick. I know we're over time, so I'll just say a couple of things to conclude. I mean, first is obviously I believe public health is an investable thesis. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. At the same time, though, I think that we need to complete rethink in terms of how we assess value. Okay. And there needs to be innovation in value assessment methods. And the world in the next 40 years will not look like the world in the last 40 years. This train is already moving forward, and we better figure out quickly where it's going and how we're going to shape the destination. And I think that working across sectors is absolutely critical in ensuring that future is a place that we all want to get to. And then, in terms of multi-sectoral collaboration, obviously, we spent the whole hour today, talking about how important that is, simply because public health is everybody's business. public health is not the business of
It is
only
our
those.
health.
It's not only the business of the health department, right? I think COVID has made it very clear that it is everybody's business. And when things go wrong, we all suffer. It doesn't matter if you work in public health or not. And
Absolutely.
so, or whether you're poor or not, right? I think COVID has made it very clear. And so because it's everybody's business, we do need to figure out better ways to actually collaborate. What kind of innovation, technology or otherwise, can help break down those silos? What kind of innovation can build trust in society?
Let me just tell you, you guys, I wish we had another hour. You're bringing up so many wonderful points that I like. We could easily keep this going. Oh my gosh! Thank you so much.
But at the end of the day, I have known no collaboration, successful collaboration, that is not built on simply a group of champions, who are determined to make things work.
Yes, I echo that.
And so that's what we need. We need to find those champions. There are a few of us here at the table today. Hopefully we'll bring along a few more. And if we can group together, band together, and say, you know what, this is what is needed, and keep saying it, persisting, the world will listen. And so that's where we're at. We just need to bring those champions together. We can make this happen.
Wonderful, wonderful. And honestly, I have enjoyed this conversation so much. So many threads I wish we could have touched on even more. We've touched on so many amazing topics. There are also, because Terry and Waleed, you cannot see the questions, there are people saying, thanks, this was a great conversation. So would just like to acknowledge that. And to you in the audience, I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of your questions. Obviously, we had a wonderful, kind of thread of our conversation topics tonight. Waleed, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Terry, thank you so much.
Thank you. And anybody who wants to follow up, you can find me easily online. So just shoot me an email.
I'm on LinkedIn, so.
Yeah. And actually, I forgot to mention Firefly Innovations. We have a solve-a-thon, a hackathon, that in partnership with MIT Solve on December 5th. The application is still open. It's focused on the interconnected cycle of mental health, substance use, and loneliness. Very timely topic. So anybody who knows anyone who wants to apply to be an innovator or a contributor for this day-long event, please do check out our website, firefly-innovations.com.
Excellent. Wonderful. Thank you again, Waleed, Terry. I hope we can do it again.
I hope so. So.
This has been fun. Next time we'll have a glass of wine.
Absolutely.
you have my connection. No problem.
All right.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.